What's up, guys? Welcome to another trade breakdown video. Today, we're going to be talking about the complete overhaul that happened in Vancouver on Friday night. They didn't just make one trade; they made two. And honestly, the pieces that came back to Vancouver were very questionable, especially for what they gave up. So, starting with the first trade, we have JT Miller, who was a part of the whole Pettersson drama. They did not like each other. It's been ongoing for years, even with the previous coach, Bruce Boudreau, who confirmed that there
Bruce.
was issues there. Um, and now, with Rick Tocchet as a head coach, he had to, deal with that as well. And, it hurt the team's success this season and especially Pettersson's game. And, obviously it had a major impact on the locker room and for all the wrong reasons. And the fact that it took Patrick Alvin sometime this week to announce that, yes, these rumors are true and we're going to try to find a solution to it. Well, obviously, the only solution is to either trade one or trade both. And in this case, JT Miller is a member of the New York Rangers, along with Erik Brannstrom, who um, was a healthy scratch for most of his time, but did quarterback the power play a couple of games when Jack Hughes was injured. They get a defensive prospect in Jackson Dorrington. And in terms of Vancouver, they get Filip Chytil, who is a fantastic third line center, but has um, a lot of issues in terms of his health, specifically concussions, and he's known for having concussions and not playing that much due to the amount of concussions he's had these last couple of seasons.
Right.
But when healthy, he's a fantastic third line center. And they get Victor Mancini, who's a young defenseman. That's a need for the Vancouver Canucks, and we'll talk about the next trade after. They addressed a need by getting not just one defenseman, but a couple of defensemen, and they get a first round pick that is protected. Um,
Yeah.
we'll talk about what happens with that first round pick after, but we're gonna do the breakdown of this first trade.
Yeah. So basically, there's this saying, when especially in hockey and all of team sports, when you're winning, your problems go away. When you're losing, your problems are only amplified. And I think that's what's been happening throughout this first half of the campaign for Vancouver. Things are not going their way. They were off to a really good start actually before Demko came back from his injury. But the team has fallen off since. There's many reasons to that. They're pretty top heavy this year. Their depth scoring is not where it needs to be. Guys like Pettersson are not producing to the dollar amount that they're paying him for. And there's all of this off of the ice shit that they've been, like you mentioned, that they've been dealing with as well. It doesn't help a situation when a team is struggling, but struggling. They're at 56 points right now. They're a point out of a wild card spot in the West. They're still a team in the mix, but they're not really getting results as of late. And JT Miller, it's really a shame that it's come to an end with Vancouver, just because he was such a fundamental piece to the organization. If we track back to just a year ago, fans were chanting his name for an extended period of time after a game in which he left his heart out there. I believe it was after a playoff game against Nashville last year. Look, you're showing the numbers here. He's scored 100 points, got close another time. He's been well over a point per game, pretty much throughout his whole tenure in Vancouver, and he's actually the second player in Vancouver Canucks history to have maintained an over point per game ratio, and the only other player in their history to have done that is Pavel Bure. So that's really good company for JT Miller. Obviously, he's known to be a bit of a character, but he's a fantastic hockey player. And I think going to the Rangers, a team now that is is still a good stretch of form from being back in that wild card contention. They've had their problems as well, but you go there, it's a veteran core that's been underwhelming this year, and they kind of needed that spark. A guy like JT Miller comes in, he's not afraid to ruffle feathers. That's what we know for sure. He's was apparently really hard on Elias Pettersson at practice, during games, etc., demanding the most out of his teammates. And I think you get a veteran guy like that going into the Rangers locker room. Those are all experienced players who could handle it. They care about winning. They want to go back to where they were last year and be at least be a team that's going back to the playoffs. And JT Miller is, he's the perfect guy to spark that locker room. And so enough about JT Miller for now. I'll talk about the other pieces in the trade. Mancini, who's a depth defenseman, going the other way as well. And as well as Victor Mancini, you get a first round pick that is protected for the top 13 picks in the draft, meaning that if the Rangers were to, because of the draft lottery after this season, be able to select in the top 13, then their 2026 pick becomes unprotected. But we're going to talk about this pick again in a bit, because there was a second big trade that happened last night. And so this first round pick is again on the move, and it's going to the Pittsburgh Penguins direction. But for this trade, there's Victor Mancini, Filip Chytil, and going to the Rangers side, obviously JT Miller, but Jackson Dorrington, who is a late round draft pick, and Erik Brannstrom, who falls out of favor pretty often with coaches, but he's a little genie out there at times, and who could run a power play. So who won this trade? Chris, your thoughts? Who do you think this trade benefits more in the short term and also in the long term?
Well, as you can see, my comment right here, traded an 100-point player for a bag of chips. I think that's all you need to know in terms of my opinion. JT Miller is a character guy. He does it all. He hits, he blocks, he's a fantastic playmaker. He scores goals. He was such a pivotal piece to the Vancouver Canucks' success, especially in their playoff run last year. And people were upset, saying, "Why did you trade Bo Horvat a couple of years ago and keep JT Miller when we want JT Miller out?" But JT Miller is the better hockey player, and
Right.
unfortunately, now looking back at it, Bo Horvat was a fantastic captain, and I think they should have kept Bo Horvat based off of what has happened this season alone.
I disagree.
So, I mean, look, their center depth is very weak now without him. So now they're going to be relying on Pettersson. You had, Miller, who was a winger, but, a center option. You had Bo Horvat. You had Pettersson. They had one of the best center depth in the league once upon a time. And now you're just left with Pettersson, who's been very underwhelming. And apparently there's still rumors out there that he's still going to be on the move because Vancouver is so done with Miller and Pettersson that now they moved on to Miller. He was drafted by the Rangers. He's very familiar with that organization. He found success there, and he knows some of the players that have been there. And now he's gonna find, in my opinion, instant chemistry. He's gonna be playing first line power play. I think players like Panarin, Kreider, and Zibanejad were missing a player like that, but that doesn't excuse their overall poor play this season. But the Rangers have been waking up and are inching closer to a playoff spot once again. It's going to be a tight race in the East, but I think now getting Miller doesn't necessarily solidify themselves making the playoffs, but they're going to be in it till the end.
Yeah, well,
if everyone stays healthy.
Yeah, they have to go on a run. For sure, they have to go on a run. There's some teams that are on the outside looking in that are closer to a playoff spot than the Rangers. The Rangers, I believe, right now have about 5 teams or 4 or 5 teams to jump. But what I'll say is that Elias Pettersson was probably close to getting moved, but not as close as JT Miller, just because of his contract, because he's making $11.5 million. But I think both were out there, and they felt desperate, Vancouver, and they had to move on. But it's a shame that this has happened to them. They were so great last year. They had made it back to the postseason. Things were looking sharp with Rick Tocchet. They had Thatcher Demko was one of the best goaltenders in the league last year. Obviously Quinn Hughes is electric. That whole team from top to bottom on offense was very, very solid. And now they're in the predicament that they're in. moving on to this next trade over here. So I'm going to read out the trade details. So Vancouver Canucks general manager Patrick Alvin announced today that the club has acquired defenseman Marcus Pettersson and forward Drew O'Connor from the Penguins in exchange for forwards Danton, Heinen, defenseman Vincent Desharnais, the rights to forward Melvin, Fernstrom, and a conditional first-round pick, which we spoke about earlier. So this happens hours later. And this is a deal where, Vancouver acquire a much needed top four defenseman with their back end being pretty thin beyond Quinn Hughes, and they get a formidable option in Marcus Pettersson as well as a depth forward in Drew O'Connor. But I love this deal for the Penguins. They clear they clear salary cap space, and as well as they get a nice first round pick out of a player that was most likely going to be dealt closer towards the trade deadline. So I think for Kyle Dubas, I think it's the right move to make. Obviously, this season hasn't gone the way they've expected. They've thought, at least, I think you could agree with me that they've been thought to be a team that was at least going to be closer to being in the mix this year. Especially with the expensive core that they had and all the moves they made in the offseason to try to kind of close the band-aid a little bit. But a lot of the moves they made didn't work out. Kevin Hayes on most nights is a no-show. Rutger McGroarty is not playing with the Penguins right now. He's down in the A. There's a lot of their moves in the offseason that haven't worked out for them. Matt Grzelcyk comes in, all right. Their goaltending has been subpar. They're not where they want to be. But Marcus Pettersson, you're showing it here, has been a very good, stable top four option for the Penguins now since the 2018-19 season. And he's played big minutes this year. He's averaging 23 minutes a night, and he's been very solid and given that ice time. And now he goes to Vancouver and is probably going to be their second option over there.
I wouldn't say necessarily second option because they do have Filip Chytil, who they locked up long term and had a fantastic season last year. But
is he still injured?
No, he's back.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah,
yes, he's their third option.
Yeah. So I mean, he would be probably their best defensive defenseman as of right now. And there's not really any competition, in my opinion, when you're comparing him to the likes of Tyler Myers and
Eric
Noah
Forbes,
Jocelyn as well. There's not really
Carson Soucy.
there's not really much competition there. So Marcus Pettersson is going to be placed on the PK unit and is going to be playing a very defensive role. But I mean, he still is pretty offensive as well. I think that helps playing for the Pittsburgh Penguins. He had 30 points last year in 82 games, so that's pretty impressive for the type of player that we're discussing.
Okay.
And this is a team that suffered immensely defensively this year. Losing Ian Cole in recent years and losing Nikita Zadorov. All these guys were big defensive bodies that ate rubber, and they stayed back. And unfortunately, this year Quinn Hughes had to endure most of the defensive responsibilities and the offensive responsibilities to the point where they rushed him back from a hand injury. And last night versus the Dallas Stars, he was in significant pain. He's really banged up. Teams are going and targeting him because they know that without him, there is no success for the Vancouver Canucks, especially this season. He's carrying the team on both ends of the ice. So
Yes.
I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't finish the year with how things are going. We don't know this, how significant the injuries are, but he had left the game, came back, was in significant pain skating yesterday, didn't really play that much towards the end of the game. So we'll see what happens in terms of his situation. But I know Vancouver's making all these moves. They add Mancini to their decor. They add Marcus Pettersson. They get rid of Vincent Desharnais' horrible contract that they signed during this offseason. They get rid of Danton Heinen as well, who was signed this offseason. It just seems to me that they made a lot of mistakes during the off season. The only thing that's somewhat panned out to a certain degree is Jake DeBrusk, and he's
Yeah,
also been
and then
struggling.
honestly, that move is not looking good since January. He hasn't produced much. I think
Yeah,
right now
he
he's
scored his
got,
first goal yesterday in like I think 12 games, if I'm mistaken.
what was that?
More. Jake DeBrusk scored his first goal like in after
Yes,
like a 12
yes.
game drought, or if I'm mistaken.
Yeah, he's been on a drought. I think now he's got 30 points in 50 games, and it's a stretch from the way he had started the season. Well, look, they signed him for 7 years. They took a big gamble signing him for 5.5. We know the cap. We know as of the news yesterday as well regarding the salary cap going up significantly in the next 2 years. That some contracts are going to be looked at differently. But they committed 7 years to Jake DeBrusk. They thought putting him on Elias Pettersson's wing was going to elevate both players, and that hasn't really happened for them this year. And well, you mentioned Quinn Hughes. Quinn Hughes has been absolutely fantastic this year, but yet it's a lower body injury for sure. I don't know if you could pull up the clip on Twitter of when they show Quinn Hughes going into a little bit of discomfort.
Yeah, I'll pull it up right now. But
You can kind of assess it, but it's lower body for sure.
I just the way things are going, I just don't see him finishing the season. Unfortunately, like they're gonna probably have to close him out. They're probably gonna have to um shut him down for the rest of the season because it looks like even though they're a point away, like
Yeah.
the way things are trending, Besser's contract negotiations are not going well. It seems like he doesn't want to re-sign as
Mhm.
well, and he was a 40 goal scorer last year, and he's known for having a bad past with injuries too. The Brusque is inconsistent. Connor Garland had a good start, like the Brusque, now has been inconsistent, despite having a little bit of a spark under him this week. Um, so that's just the clip of Quinn Hughes. But
Yeah,
the
he's
team
really
overall
on
is
there.
underwhelming, and even their defense, their goaltending. I look at this team, and look, their defense is so much better now. They added Derek Forbert, and they added Carson Soucy as well. In the off season, and this is a complete rehaul of their defense, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Mancini get in there and play a couple of games as well, because he did have some NHL games this season, playing 15 with the Rangers and having 5 points, which is pretty impressive for a rookie at 22 years old. So yeah, this Canucks team is not a playoff team in my opinion. If they're relying on the success of one player who is inching closer and closer to a hospital bed, in my opinion. Yeah, it's just not looking good. Elias Pettersson is not elevating his game. Demko has been horrible since coming back.
Mhm.
Lankinen has been inconsistent since Demko has come back.
He's played
Uh,
30 games. This is not something Vancouver fans would have expected. Lankinen's played 31 or 32 games already this year.
yeah,
Um, it's not the start of the season they expected, and
the yeah
it's
the
not right now. They're not. They haven't since January. They haven't had the best form. So this is a team that you know has been slipping significantly in the standings, and unless there's a spark right now, from these two trades, maybe that's what they wanted. I think Alvin wanted to create a spark for this team, galvanize the room a little bit and say like, hey, look, we're not scared of making moves. You guys have to go out there and
oh,
perform.
I mean, this is not a team that screams playoffs. Drew O'Connor is at most a third line player, and even though he's very effective in a bottom six role, don't expect too much from him. I know
Yeah.
he's only 26 years old, but and for an undrafted player, it's very impressive. What he's accomplished, but like that doesn't really scream that they've improved on their offense. They get
I
that
don't personally.
Heinen is
I
gone.
agree with you. I don't see them as a playoff. I don't think they're a playoff team. But I think this is they're a team that's intentions to make the playoffs. And another thing I'll say about the initial move for JT Miller, they netted 3.6 million on the cap with that move, and then they used a majority of it to be able to land Marcus Pettersson after. So that was a telltale sign that another move was probably going to be made by them. It's just we did not know it was going to happen.
And the worst part
Right
about
away.
this deal is that Miller has term on his contract, and the players that they get in return from Pittsburgh after flipping their first round pick, that's top 13 protected, are UFAs.
Yeah,
Drew Connor's a UFA, and Marcus Pettersson's a UFA. So that doesn't really help their situation. Like, yes, they get rid of the likes of Erik Brannstrom, who couldn't really find a spot on this team. Okay, that's fine. They get rid of a bad contract and Vincent Desharnais. That I understand. That didn't work out as well. Um, but the main piece here is that JT Miller, being traded for a bag of chips essentially is ridiculous in terms of their assessment of his value and
no, it
the
is really because
importance.
I don't care how controversial he was. This guy's a fantastic hockey player.
Yeah, the Rangers are laughing, and this is the best time for teams to strike. Chris Drury did a fantastic job with this acquisition, and he's potentially going to save, his season from collapsing. But I mean, there is some people in the Rangers locker room that are still not happy. Jimmy
Yeah,
Vesey is one of them. Zach Jones is another one that continued to voice their displeasure of how they're being utilized and how the locker room is. Keandre Miller as another person as well. He's going to
he's a
be a
bit
UFA.
underperforming this year.
Yeah. So, don't think that this is going to fix the Rangers' problems. It's
No, but
definitely going to make them better, but Chris Kreider and Zibanejad are still having awful seasons as well. You know, Lafreniere is not even on the first power play unit. They keep putting him on the second power play unit. Like, they got rid of Kako for a bag of chips, and he's been a point per game player
yeah,
since
yeah,
joining the
yes,
Kraken. So like, let's not like sugarcoat, and say that this trade and say like, oh, the Rangers are back, oh, the Rangers are playing fantastic. Yeah, they're playing much better, but they're still not a playoff team based off all these issues that are surrounding them.
mhm.
And um,
For,
you
for
know,
for this move to work out this year, Chris, JT Miller's got to come in and he's got to work right away. He's got to, there's no grace period where you're adjusting, going to a new team. He's got to have an impact right away because there's 30 games left in the regular season. They're about 6 or 7 points out. I know they have a game and two in hand right now with the Columbus Blue Jackets. But the Rangers have to get on a run here, and things have to happen right away. They're taking a gamble. Well, it's not really a gamble because they win. They honestly they win this deal by a long shot, and for 8 million a year for the next 5 or 6 years, I would have JT Miller on my team as well. JT Miller is a fantastic hockey player, so they win the trade by a long shot. But can they turn it around this year? It's very risky to say that this is a guarantee. I agree with you on that. I think it's very risky to say it's a guarantee, but do they still have room to make another move come the trade deadline? Yes, they have almost 4 million. They cleared up a lot of cap space with the Kako and Jacob Trouba moves, where for Jacob Trouba they didn't have to retain any money on his $8 million salary, so they have a lot of cap space to still work with, but they have to get back in the mix to say, if they in the next 10 games, if they win 8 by the end of the month, they'll make another move come trade deadline. If not, they're gonna have to put a close on their season, unfortunately.
like Will Cooley has been by far the most impressive player on this team this year, and they had Riley Smith, who hasn't been much of an impact, and
No, he
Chris
hasn't done
Kreider
much.
and
He gets power
Zibanejad.
play time, he gets opportunity, he hasn't done much with it.
Yeah, and you look at Arthur Kaliev, which is basically their Kako replacement, and even he was a very underwhelming player with the LA Kings, and they took a
Yeah,
gamble on him. And the fact that
super
Matt Brente
talented.
is on this team it doesn't scream playoffs for me. That I'll tell you that. And I think we should move on to the Pittsburgh Penguins, who are the most impressive winners in this trade because the Pittsburgh Penguins are not going anywhere. This is not a playoff team. They had a very good, um, they had a poor start. Then they had woken up after Jari was recalled from the AHL, and we thought that everything was going to be fixed. And yes, they get Danton Heinen back for the second time. So this is a player that goes to teams not just once but twice. He's played for Boston a couple of times as well.
Yeah,
But you just
he's a serial third line winger on, and he's somehow always on a 1 year deal, even though he might be signed for two. He's
he
always
works
moving.
for it.
He's what?
He works for it.
Yeah, he works for it, of course. I mean, Pittsburgh is. I think at this point they've pretty much accepted where they are. They're 3 games below 500 with 30 games left. So I think
They
they've
got
accepted.
they got rid of
And I think they have more moves to make. I think what's his face? The GM with the fancy glasses. I just
Aldubis.
Cal Dubas. I think he's still got moves to make. There's a lot of rumblings about Crosby getting moved, which is
He's not going
unlikely
to come back.
until it happens. Colorado would be definitely one of the teams that would be interested.
They move Chris Letang first, and before they move anybody.
What about Erik Karlsson?
Carlson's going to be difficult to move because of his contract, and just Marcus Pettersson. They have no defensive defenseman in my opinion. In my opinion, Ryan Graves has been nothing but disappointing since signing him as a UFA 2 years ago. Getting Erik Karlsson offensively, I guess it's worked out. But defensively, overall, his play has been horrible. Look, the fact that he's not even on the first power play, it's Matt Grzelcyk, who they signed this year. And yeah, he's got looks on the power play with the Boston Bruins. And Letang and Karlsson, who are supposed to be staples in their defense, are on the second unit. That's when you know.
Yeah,
this
they're trying a minute with their power play scheme.
Yeah,
Bouncing out. They're looking for answers, but there's not much in that roster.
Yeah, Raquel's having a fantastic season. Rust is having a good season. Even Bunting has woken up in recent weeks. But, at the start of the season, like this team was going nowhere. And I mean, they had a little bit of life in the month of December, if I'm not mistaken. But, they have since gone back to being a bottom feeding team. And, this team is just very weak on paper. They're not going to make the playoffs now that Marcus Pettersson's gone. Now that Jari's not in nets. I mean, I still do believe that to a certain extent he is better than Nedeljkovic and Blomqvist when he plays decent. They have two AHL goalies as their goaltending options right now, and Malkin is out long term. So this is a team that's going to be conceding a lot of goals now, and they're always going to be offensively talented as long as Sidney Crosby's there. But yeah, them and the Vancouver Canucks are going to be teams that miss the playoffs, and the Rangers are going to be fighting till the end. Winners of this trade, looking at everything.
Really? So you think Vancouver is? Well, I'm not high on Vancouver, but do you think out of Vancouver and New York, the Penguins are going to probably go into a full rebuild. Out of Vancouver and New York, which team do you think is more likely to make the playoffs this year?
New York. They have more offensive options. You look at their back end, you have Adam Fox, up front, as long as, even if Kreider's playing bad or Zibanejad's playing bad, the minute that they wake up, it's over. The Rangers are going to be flying again. You have Panarin, you have Lafreniere. Now you add JT Miller, you have Vincent Trocheck, who's one of the most underrated centermen in the league. I don't truly believe he's a first line center. I think he's a second line center, but because Zibanejad's playing so bad, he moves all the way down to the third line, Zibanejad, and now Miller is playing a second line role. So they have so many options. You have Igor in your back end as your goaltending first option, and then your second option is Jonathan Quick, who, yes, he's not Jonathan Quick of last season, but he's still somewhat reliable. This is still on paper a playoff team. We can't discredit them despite their locker room issues and a lot of players being underwhelming this year. And they have since woken up, and now adding JT Miller for a bag of peanuts essentially helps their cause. I think they're in the best position. And a lot of teams in the East are falling apart, like the Boston Bruins, Detroit Red Wings, Montreal Canadiens, who were hot at one point, fighting for a spot. And you have Ottawa, despite their issues on the injury front and their goal scoring issues, they've been finding ways to win hockey games. And the Columbus Blue Jackets continue to impress. Tampa's slipping a little bit too, so that's something to look at as well. Um, so yeah, it's open in the East and in the West. The St. Louis Blues are pissing away a good opportunity to overlap
To
the
climb in the standings.
Vancouver
Yeah.
the Vancouver Canucks. And I'll be honest with you, the Canucks do not deserve to make the playoffs. I don't care if Quinn Hughes is having an MVP season. Yeah, maybe him alone deserves to go to the playoffs. But you know what? Just give him the heart. Give him the the Norris trophy. But to say that this team deserves to make the playoffs, like let's relax here because this team sucks. Okay, they've been nothing but underwhelming, and if anything, the Utah Hockey Club, okay, who have they're in their inaugural season, deserve to make the playoffs. And I know they don't have Cooley and Gunther who are injured long term, but they're still trying to find a way to be competitive. Whereas the Canucks were a healthy team and they got players back at different times, and they're still somehow one point out of a playoff spot. The team that deserves to make it are the Calgary Flames. This
And
is a
they
team that
improved. They
showed,
improved,
yeah,
Chris. They got Joel Farabee and Morgan Frost. Those are
yeah,
with a change of scenery on those two guys. Maybe let's just say they let's say they don't necessarily look. There's no way in my mind that the Flames don't get better offensively by adding those two players. I think they've been so thin up front in terms of their secondary scoring that I think those guys just make the difference, and they're going to go from one of the worst scoring teams in the league to maybe potentially just being closer to average, and then that's what they'll need to actually become a threat that could make the playoffs convincingly this year.
they're going to be this year's Washington Capitals. Well, what I mean by that is that Washington was the worst team in terms of
Scoring last
scoring
year,
last year,
yeah,
and they made the playoffs, last wild card spot. And I think that's what's going to happen with the Calgary Flames.
they get amazing goaltending. Dustin
Yeah,
Wolf is fantastic.
yeah, and I'm glad that they finally figured out, who was going to be their starting goaltender because I have to give credit to Dan Vladar. He's been having a great season, but they've been wanting to get rid of him for a long time. And
Yeah,
even when Markstrom was at the starting goaltender, and
right.
Dustin Wolf is just poised to be their starting goaltender, and they would win games with him. With Vladar, they were winning, but then they started losing, and he's been playing good, but you got to go with the hot hand, right? You got to ride the hot hand. So Dustin Wolf is that guy, and I think Calgary, based off the moves they made and the fact that they want to re-sign Rasmus Anderson, that shows that they want to win. Huberto has been having a fantastic resurgence season. Kadri's been doing well. Mackenzie Weegar finally finding form. He's becoming the player that he once was
Yeah,
with the
but I
Florida
mean,
Panthers.
I
So
think yeah, I think that just everybody on that team is. If you look at their point totals, it's very underwhelming, but they are playing good hockey.
yeah, like Matt Coronado is stepping up. Connor Zary unfortunately got injured. Um, Blake Coleman's having a pretty good season for a third line player in my opinion. So
Everybody thought was finished after he got wasn't he bought out by the Rangers?
yeah, he was. So you know, very impressive what they're doing in Calgary. It's a tight knitted team, and they're finding ways to win. And they're in a better spot than the Vancouver Canucks. And they got rid of Kuzmenko, who was an issue. Very inconsistent, who they got from the Vancouver Canucks last season. And, when you get rid of Kuzmenko and you get Farabee, who's struggling, but I think has a higher ceiling than Kuzmenko, and you have Morgan Frost, who they've been looking for a centerman for quite some time, and they get a young player in Frost who's shown how brilliant he could be. And
Right.
he he was underutilized in my opinion under Tortorella, and I don't think he was going to become a top six centerman. But I think with the Calgary Flames, he will become that. So Calgary basically got rid of all their problems and got two better players in return. And the only guy who was struggling was Sharon Govich. Apart from that, that's still on the team, and I think he's slowly picking it up too. So, yeah, I know we were supposed to cover the the two JT Miller trades, but I thought that kind of bleeds in talking about the Calgary Flames past trade this week, since it's going to be between the Vancouver Canucks and Calgary Flames on who makes the last wild card spot.
Absolutely. I think it's gonna be a tight race to the end in both the Eastern and Western Conference. And I guess to wrap up this video, Pittsburgh Penguins do very well in this one, getting assets and committing, and it looks like they're one step closer to finally committing to the rebuild after 3 years of where they should have done it.
Yeah,
Um, Rangers win that trade by a long shot, in my opinion. I think we both agree on that. But
yeah,
can they turn it
100%.
around in a short period of time this year? Wait and see. And Vancouver, they honestly they seem like a lost puppy right now. They don't know what they want to be and they don't know who they are. So I'll say that on them. I think they don't have the form right now to turn things around and make the playoffs. And obviously with Quinn Hughes' status is still a wait and see. So Vancouver is a tough situation right now, and they're not going to really have a lot of cap space to deal with next year either. So there are a lot of moves to be made, maybe a couple of changes in their front office. Vancouver fans, let us know what you think in the comment section below. What you think that the Canucks should do. And Chris, any final thoughts before we sign off?
Yeah, Vancouver fans, defensively you gotten better, offensively you gotten really worse. Quinn Hughes, I don't think he finishes the season the way that he's enduring all these injuries and the responsibilities as well, and I think that's why there was a need to desperately acquire as many defensemen as possible, and they've done that, but they've also gotten rid of defensemen. Are they quality defensemen? No, they're not. But he's struggling physically with
Right.
these injuries, and if they want to make the playoffs, they need to surround them better with better defensemen that are gonna take the load off him essentially, and I think that's what they do. But they give up a lot more than what those players are worth. And also, I like to mention that um, the the Calgary Flames move this week indicates that they're going to be pushing for a playoff spot, and they're playing well. They don't have those internal issues. Everything's clicking for them, apart from scoring. And once that does, oh boy, watch out. And the Canucks, just as a whole, they almost traded Pettersson or Miller to the Carolina Hurricanes before the blockbuster Ranton and Nikas trade happened. So, that was maybe they would have gotten a better haul have they made that trade, but I believe that Pettersson's still going to be traded. I think they're fed up with him. I think they like his character. He's very weak-minded. He has a hard time overcoming obstacles and challenges. He's not your go-to guy. JT Miller is better in that regard, but even he caused problems in the locker room, and I think a lot of people were fed up with him too. I think this is a lose-lose situation at the end of the day, and this is going to cost the
Of course.
Canucks their season. I'm just going to share what you shared to me.
Yeah, you could show the
Um,
last one actually. We'll wrap it up with the Spitting Chicklets post here. So basically, this is JT Miller walking into the Canucks dressing room during their game last night, and he was traded about 20. Well, it's saying it about 25 minutes later. So probably knew the trade was coming and probably had a nice farewell to his teammates. Maybe he had some things to say to Elias Pettersson, but I'm kidding. I don't know.
just their
But
complete demeanor. This is complete demeanor during interviews and during, just him interacting with the team as a whole. I think he was fed up and he waived his no trade clause and to be able to go to the Rangers, and that was always the destination. Even if you hear teams like Carolina and um, the Colorado Avalanche were interested at one point
right,
too, like the Rangers was his go-to destination. He's always wanted to go back. They wanted him. They've been dying to get him for months now. We've been hearing reports. They've been trying their best because they're saying that they needed that, like you mentioned before, like that
They need a
harsh.
spark.
But
They
but
need a
like
guy who's gonna come and ruffle some feathers in the locker room.
exactly harsh guy, but is fair and just wants
Competitor.
to get the best out of his players. And everyone's critiquing Miller for that, but McKinnon is known for that too, for being hard on his teammates, and no one says anything. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
There are locker rooms that want to win, and there are locker rooms that find everything that's wrong with it.
Yeah, they
Everything
did.
that's wrong. There's different mentalities in a group. So,
Yeah,
guys, thanks so much for watching this video of the Young Guts podcast. You could follow all of our social medias. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram, TikTok as well. Subscribe to our channel, drop a like on this video, and we'll see you guys in the next episode of the Young Guns podcast.
bye guys.